Hey everyone, Morgan Tarpley Smith here, and we're doing another awesome author interview. This time with author, and she has a lot of other titles too, we'll talk about too. Rachel McMillan, and this is her gorgeous book cover you see for the Mozart Code. I mean, I have not seen many covers as beautiful as that. It's just gorgeous, and I know Rachel was really pleased with this cover and all the elements. If you see the background, you will see music, sheet music, and that definitely figures in to the Mozart Code. And I have my own copy here as well. So I wanted to introduce her today, but first we're going to read about the book, and I want to tell everyone that we are doing a giveaway for a copy of the Mozart Code. So if you leave a comment anywhere during this chat today, you can ask a question. You can just say hi. I'm from here, wherever, and you'll be entered into the giveaway. So please do that. We'll also be doing the giveaway. I probably won't draw until tomorrow evening, so you have time to watch this as a recording if you missed the live. So let's talk about the Mozart Code. Even hiding in a war won't let them escape their past. Lady Sophia Huntington Villiers is no stranger to intrigue, as her work with Alan Turing's bomb machines at Bletchley Park during the war attest. Now, as part of Simon Barr's covert team in post-war Vienna, she uses her inimitable charm and code name Starling to infiltrate the world of relics, uncovering vital information that could shift the balance of the mounting Cold War. When several influential men charge her with finding the death mask of Mozart, Sophie wonders if there is more than the composer's legacy at stake and finds herself drawn to potential answers in Prague. Simon Barrington, the illegitimate heir of one of Sussex's oldest estates, used the previous war to hide his insecurities about his past. Now he uses his high breeding to gain access to all four Allied quarters of the ruined city in an attempt to slow the fall of the Iron Curtain. He has been in love with Sophie Villiers since the moment he met her, and a marriage of convenience to save Simon's estate has always kept her close. Until now, when Sophie's mysterious client in Prague forces him to wonder if her allegiance to him and their cause is in question. Torn between his loyalty to his cause and his heart, Simon seeks answers about Sophie, only to learn that everything he thought he knew about his involvement in both wars is based on a lie. Dun dun dun. And the book definitely delivers all that and more, just saying. Is wonderful. I can't wait to talk to Rachel. So now it's time to bring Rachel on. And as I mentioned a minute ago, she wears a lot of hats. She's an agent. She's also a hybrid author. She has many many touches in the industry. So if you have agenting questions, industry questions, hybrid author questions, anything like that, please feel free to ask questions in the comments about the book, about her the book she released last year, The London Restoration, which also features some of the same characters. It's not a series, you don't have to read them together, but if you did read London Restoration, you'll remember Sophie and Simon, and now we get to hear their story. And if you do read Mozart Code, but you haven't read London Restoration, please do, because you'll be able to hear about Brent and Diana's story, and it's awesome. Anyway, without further ado, let's bring on author Rachel McMillan. Hello,
Hi, I'm
Rachel.
there. Hello.
So glad to have you here.
Oh, it's really fun to be here. It's the first time I've done a split time group because I don't think there are that many.
Woo!
They're one of a kind.
Well, that is one of the reasons I wanted to start this almost 3 years ago now, because I was like, I want to talk about split time. Where are my people?
Oh, I can
And
see
so,
the comments. Hello. Hello, people.
yay!
Um,
Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna try to refresh my phone so I can keep with the comments too. But yay! So glad those who are tuning in right now, and like I said, those who are tuning in later too with the recording. This will also go up on YouTube, my YouTube channel. So please check it out and check out the books for sure. But we have some awesome questions,
yeah.
Rachel. So we're gonna jump into them in just a minute. But I want everyone to know, like, where are you today? Where are you? Where do you live?
I live in Toronto, Canada, so I am
Ooh,
in a different time zone than a lot of you. It is 4 p.m. here instead of 3.
yes, and I love Rachel likes to post on her social media pictures of her walks around Toronto, and there's a castle. I'm so jealous of
Yeah.
that. She's in North America, and there's a castle where she
Yeah.
is. So check out her social media too. Okay, let me get the questions pulled up, and we will get going. We separate our questions into 4 categories, and our first category is novels. So, first question, Rachel, what inspired you to write the book? And that's a loaded question, I'm sure.
It is because, as Morgan said, I wear many hats, so I know the industry really well. And right now, it's not enough for an author to just decide, I'm going to write this book that I've always wanted to write. It's a lot about if you want to traditionally publish your book, which means publish with an editor and a publishing house. You have to kind of know what is going to sell in the marketplace so that you can get that contract. And so I really, really wanted to move from. Sorry, I'm refreshing my phone because I wrote a few notes here.
No problem.
I really wanted to move into historical romance. And I know that World War II is really, really popular. So I thought, what can I do with, first off, the post war? Because that was something that's not as explored. It's starting to be more explored. But a great example is with the London Restoration. A huge part of it is
Ooh.
the Christopher Wren churches, and I love them. But no publisher is going to buy my manuscript set during Christopher Wren's time period. So, how do I converge my individual passions with a time period that is going to be saleable to publishers? And so, with Mozart Code. Vienna is my favorite city in the entire world. I've spent a lot of time there. I love Prague. I love Mozart. So I think that the I have an ideas folder and I'm always watching for little stories, and then I'm watching the marketplace and reading a ton and thinking, how can I marry what I love and what I'm passionate about, like music, like church architecture, with stories that will be palatable for a publisher so that I can hopefully have this strange little patched up career of mine in the publishing world.
I think everyone has their journeys are completely different, right? It's
Absolutely. There's no
there's no
one way
replicated
in.
journey
Yeah,
to continue or to get in. And I will say I've been to Vienna. I haven't
love
been
it.
as many times as Rachel, but when I read this, I was just like, I'm there. I'm on my hotel balcony looking out over the city and hearing the bells, church bells and everything. So I was there. Have not been to Prague. I would love to go.
It's
But so,
stunning.
and your book even made me, want to go even more. But yes, so her details are spot on, especially if you've been to Vienna or Prague, or if you haven't and you want to experience it through fiction.
Such a good question. Thanks,
Great
guys, for these
answer.
questions.
No problem. We try to have some interesting questions, and group members come up with some good ones. Okay, this kind of in a way, I think you've answered a little bit, but Sarah Poole asked, "How do you decide what to write about?" And you did kind of speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it was a lot about just talking to my editor to get, as Morgan said, we have a lot of different paths into publishing. Nobody was buying my historical romance, so my agent at the time said, "Can you add some mystery?" And the moment I wrote an Edwardian set female Sherlock Holmes, we had several offers. So I got in the door writing a genre that is not my typical genre,
And
but
those
I was
books
like,
are great too, by the
I
way. I've
love
read them,
them.
so I just want to put that out there because I've
um,
read those too. I've been reading a fan of Rachel's for a long time. So
so I wrote those, and then another opportunity to write more historical mysteries, but set in 1930s Boston arose. So it was a lot about how do I get, finally, after 8 books outside of my preferred genre, how do I get into my genre? And so I really talked to my editor, and my agent and I spent 6 months just on the proposal for London Restoration to make sure that I was finally able to kind of move out. And I do believe that more and more I'm going to have a little bit more agency in what I write. But we all start somewhere. So it was it was a very calculated and strategic plan for me to write about something I love about, which is Christopher Wren churches. I'm a huge fan of London. I'm fascinated by Bletchley Park, but also to make it marketable, because that's that's really important nowadays.
that's a very key component there. And I
Yeah.
will say it in London Restoration, I've been to London several times and I loved it. I don't know much about architecture, but you learn so much about Christopher Wren. It makes you see London and churches in a whole new light I read that book. So now when I go to
It's so
London
fun.
again, I'm gonna be like, Christopher Wren churches. Oh my gosh, yes.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, I had no idea. I mean, I love St. Paul's. I've been there several times. I love it, but I didn't think about who was the architect for it.
Yeah, it's fun.
So I love it. And you have also you always put little nice historical nuggets in there, like just weave it in. About I loved about in London Restoration when you talked about the guard at St. Paul's
Yes.
who were like they were trying to protect their iconic, church in the city.
That's a book idea I've always had, so hopefully I can just write about that guard at some point because that would be
You
fun.
never know. They may just slip in somewhere you don't even
Yeah.
expect. Well, another next question. Angela Ingram Johnson asked, "What period in history do you like to include in your books the most?"
It's really hard because, as I said, I'm kind of writing. I didn't ever anticipate that I'd ever be writing in this time period. My specialist degree in university was as a Victorianist. So, if we lived in an ideal world and I could write whatever I wanted, I would write Victorian set fiction, because it's I'm a Dickens and Bronte girl, so I'd love to write anything set in the 19th century. But alas,
Maybe the time's coming, Rachel. Everyone,
maybe.
buy Victorian books. Make them popular so Rachel can write that, please.
Yeah.
You never know. I know that's another thing. The trends in the market and time periods can shift. So who
They
knows? There's
shift.
there's
Yeah.
time for a Victorian resurgence.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, great question. Next question from Denise Gleason or Glisson. Does your newest book go with the first World War II book you wrote? Or
Yes,
just
and the Morgan also said the overlap is Simon Barr or Simon Barrington. He changes his name when he works for MI6, and it actually wasn't supposed to be more than one book, but I fell in love with Simon when I was writing this, and
yes.
I told my editor Simon needs his own book, and then she said, "Okay, Simon needs a girl." So then I created Sophie Villiers, and she becomes a friend of my heroine in this, and they all work at Bletchley Park, and that's kind of the tie over, but that is how they connect by the characters.
I love it, and I love too that, like I said, if whichever order you read the books in, there's not a particular order, but if you do Mozart Code, make sure you read London Restoration because you'll get to know about Britt and Diana's their story and what they
Yeah.
went through and their love story, and it's definitely unique and beautiful in its own right. So make sure to check that one out. All right. Next question. Marlene Rimple asked, "Who are your favorite authors?"
Okay, I read a ton in a million genres, so I have a million favorites. I love Kate Quinn. I love The Huntress. I love Diamond Eye. I think she's not going to be for everybody because she curses a lot in her books. And there is a lot of sensuality in her books. But she's a dear friend and a brilliant writer, so I love her. Deanna Raybourn, I love. She writes historical mysteries. Anna Lee Huber is another close friend of mine whose books, actually, I met her because I was a fan first and foremost.
And
Um,
Rachel calls herself a book gusher. She's for
I
first and foremost a book gusher.
I love gushing about books. Jessica Dada wrote my favorite books ever written in Christian or in-spe
Wow.
fiction. The Price of Privilege trilogy. They're set in the Victorian period. I highly recommend them. Amanda Dykes, I think, is one of the most brilliant writers alive. Elizabeth Camden, I love. Eva Ibbotson, she writes a Viennese. She's been dead for years, but her books are all romances set in Vienna. Mimi Matthews, I love. So there's about 18 million if you follow me on Instagram or Goodreads. But that's a really hard question because I can't. Obviously, I studied Dickens in university quite intensively, so I do like Dickens. I really like my
Well,
classics
and
too.
your favorite novel, classic novel of all time, Villette, right? Am I saying it
Yeah,
right?
Viet. Yeah.
Villette.
Charlotte Bronte. Yeah. I love
Because you
that
have
book to death.
gushed about that so many times. I've never read it, but I know about it because of you. So
I was 14 and everybody was loving Jane Eyre, and I love Jane Eyre too, but it's that one. It's set in Brussels, and I love Brussels. It's another city I love to visit. So, yeah.
hey, that
Oh, I
Brussels
see.
might end up in a novel.
We're working on it someday. Yay.
Yes, Perry Ann said book gusher. I love that term. I
I
do
like that
too.
term too. Yeah, it started years and years ago, when I used to have a book blog, but I've kind of kept it. And so,
It
It's fun.
works.
Yeah.
And it's part of your brand is like the book gushing and
Yeah.
stuff. And if you follow her on Facebook too, especially, there's lots of book gushing going. If you want to know what Rachel's loving, she's going to put it on there. So
Yep.
I keep up with it and I'm like, okay, I know what Rachel's loving this week. Love it. Yes, and that's a hard question. So great answers. Our next question is, do you plan to write more split time or dual time novels?
Yeah, and we should, mention that Mozart Code and London Restoration, they're not your traditional split time where
Mhm.
they start with a contemporary frame.
Mhm.
When I set out, there are 3 books in this contract that are all post-war or World War II. And when I set out, I was like, they all have to be about married couples. So the first is Brent and Diana's story begins where usually the credits would roll in a film. They're reunited after the war. But it's not enough to just get to see them then. You have to build the foundation. So the
Mhm.
flashbacks became integral to show how they lived separate lives during the war. She was at Bletchley Park. She signed the Official Secrets Act. She can't tell him what she's been doing. Brent was at the front as a stretcher bearer. So their worlds collide after the war, but they're different people. So the
Mhm.
foundation of their relationship is what I pursue in the split time. Same with Mozart Code. Simon and Sophie are there's a marriage of convenience. Simon's in love with Sophie. Sophie hasn't figured out that she's in love with Simon, but I needed to flash back in order to show their relationship developing so that readers really get behind and root for them in the post-war years.
And
So
you
that
do, you root for them.
and then my next book, I don't have a cover yet, but it is a retelling of this is my battered research copy, The Scarlet Pimpernel in World War
Yay!
II France in 1943 and 1944. And again, it's a marriage because Percy and Marguerite in the classic novel are married. So the flashback sequences are how I do that. However, the next batch of books that I want to pitch to my publisher are dual time, but all historical dual time.
Historical,
So
awesome.
World War One,
I
World
love
War
that, and we're
Two.
seeing
Yeah.
more of that. We're seeing more of that, which I love too, because it's interesting to see, like just the difference of a few years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and that's what I love about the style of writing is it's not just cookie cutter at all. There's nothing similar. I mean, you can have 5 authors that just brought release books, and it's all going to be a different way they do it, and it may be 20 years apart because I know there's authors that have like 20 years apart, but it's all contemporary. Then we have historicals like Kathy Gokey's Secrets She Kept, which is like a
Yeah.
1960s or 70s and 1940s, 30s, 40s. And so I love that. And I love, and so I get asked a lot, like, what makes it split time? Well, I'm like, well, if it has multiple storylines that hold their own and need to be told in a solid way, not just a single flashback or a few flashbacks. And so with reading yours, Rachel, you definitely do that in a unique way, but we do see the need to know the parallel storylines happening.
Because they need to bolster what is
Yes.
happening in my current timeline. So I also really, I would also love to do more like Catherine Ray did in the London House with epistolary or letters. I have some ideas for that, but it's just trying to get them all together. But
Yeah, and we got to interview
it
Catherine and talk about
was
the
great.
London house. So awesome. Yeah, please keep us updated. And now that you're a member of our group, you can please let us know your
I
your
know,
updates and news and stuff. And
I'm on the group.
we also like shout out other authors. Like if you see another author post that their book's on sale, like share it in our group because we love to share news and help authors however we
Yeah.
can. So awesome. Let's see. I think we got one more question in this section. Yeah. What? So you already told us a little about your book. Do you have
My
anything else
Scarlet
to add about
Pimpernel
your
book.
next book? Yeah. Anything else?
Um,
France, a married couple.
Yeah, it's set in Rouen and Paris, and it basically is me adapting the story of the Pimpernel, who
That's
basically
awesome.
in leaves a symbol and thwarts. But again, I'm transposing it from the French Revolution to World War II, so there are some changes. But if you've read the novel or not, you'll get something out of it. I also have a book coming out in March 2023 with Harper Muse with 2 other authors, Amy Runyon and Janelle Zazelski. It's
Oh,
called The
awesome.
Castle Keepers, and it's a
Ooh.
collaborative novel where each of us is setting our story at a castle during 3 different wars. So Amy's story
Wow.
is during the Boer War, Janelle's story is World War One, and my story is post World War II, when the castle has been turned into a convalescent hospital for mental patients of shell shock. So it's romantic, and it's coming out in March. So I've got 2 books out next year, which is fun.
Woo! Awesome. Can't wait. I love castles. You had me at castle. So, like I said, you get to walk by a castle in Toronto.
I
Jealous.
do, yeah. It's fun. Toronto's great.
I love it. Awesome. Okay, well, our next section of questions is about writing.
Yes.
Renee Pelfrey asked, "What do you enjoy the most about writing and being an author?"
The research. I love research a lot. I love the moment when my characters start talking to me, so I'm just taking their dictation. Like Simon sat down and I heard his voice and I can hear him and see him so clearly. I love that. I obviously love being a part of the author and reader community. I've met some of my very closest friends in the world through writing, which I think is really cool. And I love the age of Zoom, which means that I can reach far more readers than before when we did traditional book tours. I can have book club chats in the States, in England, everywhere. And of course, I get to write off my book travel for tax purposes. And
Woo!
so that is, I love being able to travel and write longhand all the descriptions that end up in my books after. So the travel is a huge part of what I love.
That's so cool. And I know you definitely did a lot of research when you were in Vienna before, making
Yes.
notes about everything. So in
Yeah.
Bletchley Park, you were at Bletchley
Yeah.
Park. So
Yeah.
awesome. I love the travel aspect too, of course. So Lucy M. Reynolds asked, "What inspires you to write?"
Basically, I'm an imaginative and romantic person who's always trying to figure out why I don't really fit into the time period I live in. That's one of the things. But also, I have been a absolutely voracious reader since I was a kid, and I inhale books like oxygen. And so I think that they needed to come out in some way. So I think it's an overactive imagination, an absolute passion for finding new ideas and stories, and just the amount of books I read kind of fuel my wanting to try it on my own. So really
I
fun
love it.
question.
No,
Yeah.
great answer. Great answer. Um, I'm gonna pop off camera just a minute after I ask the next
Yeah.
question and get my phone charger so I can look
Oh.
at comments. I forgot to grab the phone charger. So I'm gonna slip off, grab the phone charger, come back, but I'm gonna ask the next question. All right, so the next question is from Angela Ingram Johnson. How did you get started writing?
That's a really good question. I've been writing since I was a little kid, but I never showed anyone my writing. Not my parents, not my family, not my friends. I wrote so many stories, many of them longhand, many of them terrible, that live in notebooks under my childhood bed in my parents' house. Um, But I was always too afraid to show anyone my writing. So I thought, oh my gosh, I love to do this as a hobby and it's something that fulfills me. If I do it forever just for me, I'm going to be happy. But it was about 7 years ago that I decided, if you don't show anyone your writing, if you don't take a chance, you're going to regret it forever. So I took a chance and I queried my my ideal agent, and he signed me the next week, and he was the first person to have ever read my writing at the time period. And so
Wow.
it's a book set. It has never been published. It did not get a contract. Maybe someday it will. But I started as a kid and I wrote stories upon stories. It's just they never really went anywhere, and I was too scared to show anyone. And even now, I do not have critique partners. I don't show anyone my writing until my editor gets it, because I am very self-conscious. So I do my own thing.
Wow, so you really have, I know I've heard of authors, it's hard to relinquish your babies, like, but you really, like, it's really hard because you're like, no one's seen this. It's been mine.
Oh, I
And I know
hated
you
it.
said it was hard to finally relinquish Sophie and Simon
Yeah.
to your team, but also to readers too, even though it's
Oh, it's
exciting.
awful because they're no longer mine.
They're
Once
not
a reader
yours.
gets it, they can decide
You have
whatever
to
they
share
want.
them with us. You have to
Yeah.
share.
Um, and reader expectations are just so funny, especially working for an inspirational publisher where half of us do not write Christian stories. So yes, closed door, but half of us
Mhm.
at Harper Muse and Thomas Nelson are not writing overtly Christian books. And so readers see that logo and think it's going to have Christian characters,
Mhm.
whereas I don't really write. I guess Brent is a theology professor in London Restoration, but I don't have
Yeah,
a history of writing Christian characters. If you glean Christian symbols from my books and
you do.
themes,
I do.
I'm a thematic writer, so that's great. But you relinquish your book to a bunch of one-star reviews and readers who slide into your messages saying there was no Christian content in your book, and it's like, I'm sorry, I don't know. Thanks for checking it out.
Yeah, and that's one reason with our group I have my specific rating system
I
because I
loved
want
hearing
it
about the
to
ratings.
be more about the content and not our opinion because everyone's opinion is subjective of 1 star,
Yeah,
5 star. So I'm gonna throw it out there, guys. If you haven't checked out our rating, we have like a sunflower is like very clean, barely kissed kind of situation. Then we have our heart, which is more of hints at passion, has possibly some more violence, but it's on the lower end. And then we have our flame, which would be this. And you have some violence, you have heavy romance, but it is a closed door kind of situation. And then we have our beyond the rating system too. So you can choose, what you want to write, and we're not judging anyone on what they're reading, but
no,
it'll help you. So if you want to read something that has, is clean but has some spicier things in it, then this is the flame rating is for you.
but
So
still within the confines of marriage. So hurrah!
exactly that too. So yeah, and so it's a way to hopefully steer from those 1 star reviews because of the content. And so I was trying to
And
think of a
the
way to help
yeah,
with
and
that.
it's fantastic. We just are always trying to figure out how to manage those expectations because obviously there's
Hmm.
super Christian writers at my publishing house like Christy Cambrin and
Hmm.
Rachel Hauk and Colleen Coble, but there's a bunch of us like Catherine Ray who are writing, and Janelle Sazelsky who are writing a little bit different, but
Yeah, writing for
hopefully,
general market.
yeah,
So yeah, and that's one reason why our group is also not just Christian fiction because I also love to read clean general market
yeah.
fiction too,
And
and I
there's
wanted to
tons
have
out
a
there.
range for readers, so a place for all kinds of readers and authors. Awesome. Okay, let's move on to our next question. Let's see. Liza or Lisa, layman, is it difficult to keep your characters true to the personalities you have created for them? When you edit out scenes, does it feel like losing part of yourself? So it's a two-part question.
Yeah, especially because my characters introduce themselves to me. So I was in London for fun, just on vacation, when I went to visit a church called St. Bartholomew the Great, which is in West Smithfield. And I loved this church. And Brent Somerville walked on and sat down in my head. And so
Love it.
my characters become my friends, especially during the pandemic when Toronto was in lockdown for almost 2 years.
Wow.
Sophie and Simon were my
Your
connections to, yeah,
besties.
I
You're
live
your
alone.
besties.
So it's really hard also because I write 3 times as much as what usually ends up in the book. A lot ends up in the cutting room floor. It it's not, I believe, hard for me to stay true to their personalities so
Mhm.
much as it takes my editor to get them reader facing. Because in my head, they all make sense to me. I can hear them, see them. They're all talking away, they're chattering. Um, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily accessible to the reader. So it's my editor's job and my line editor. I have an amazing line editor too who goes through the book again and again. And
It
that's
takes a
when
village,
it
right? A
really is.
village.
It's like translating from my crazy brain to the page through people who can help usher it out to readers. But I always cry when I turn in a book. Like I'm inconsolable for days. It's very sad, and
Well,
not
it's that
everybody
it's
would
that
understand that.
parting. It's that parting
It's
for especially
so
like you said, not having critique partners and stuff. Like it's just really like you're having to make yourself hand it over.
and you realize that you put stuff in. I put a lot of myself and my insecurity into Mozart Code that I will never get that back again. Like, I lose part of myself with every book. That might sound really strange to people, but it's like I am never the same now because I have done this. So it's I mean, it's worth it. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't worth it, but
Well,
it can be difficult.
that takes immersive experience as a writer and a reader to a whole new level, Rachel. You just and I do think I've had questions before of like, do you write yourself into characters? I think in some way authors can't write themselves in some way into a book in some area
Yeah.
and lose and hand off a part of themselves when they turn the book in. And when readers get to read it and start having the opinions and reviews, like you said, it's a scary time.
I just don't want readers to ever think that they're a legitimate parallel. I mean, in my
Mhm.
Hamish DeLuca books, I suffer from panic and anxiety and have since I was a kid. So I gave him all of my physical symptoms. So
Mhm.
that was very intentional. But sometimes if someone reads something and they like, oh, Jemima in one of my books has a terrible mother. Oh, does Rachel have mother issues? I don't. My mom's amazing. So you can't always just
Oh, definitely not.
parallel author experience with what's going on.
Definitely not, and that's the key is you usually don't know what part of the author's putting themselves in the book.
Yeah. And it's
You
part of the
just
fun. And that's
Yes.
why we have, interaction, and authors are able to talk about their lives on social media and give you a bit of the behind the scenes so that you can see that, we're nice, somewhat normal, healthy,
Yeah,
happy
quirky,
people.
the world's a little quirky in there. I love it. Alright, our next question. Oh, this is a really
It's a
good
really
question
good
because
one.
it kinda goes straight into what we just talked about.
Yeah.
Bonnie Jean Marlowe Marley, she asks, "Do you ever include scenes from your real life in your fiction?"
I would say that unintentionally, I mean, I includes part of my as for actual scenes, but I will say that I express my passion for certain things and places. So you get a lot of my personality in like my love for Vienna. It's more apparent, I believe, in I write contemporary romances called the Three Quarter Time series. I independently
Yay.
publish those. And that's when you're going to see a little bit more of awkward, socially awkward, especially in the dating world, Rachel, because that's where just because they're contemporary and they're a little more free, and you get I believe a little bit more of Rachel in real life in those.
I c
But
and I can when I'm reading those, I can see you sitting at a cafe
oh,
with,
I'm
you
always,
know,
yeah.
in Vienna, and so I loved it. I love the contemporary too. So, like I said, I've been a Rachel fan a while, so I've
That's
been
so sweet.
following the different trends of Rachel and the book gushing, of course. Yeah, great question. And I think too, a lot of times, like, our life as a writer author, our life inspires different scenes. It may be turned on its head though, but it's still
Yeah.
inspired by something that someone's told us or we've overheard. You never know. Everything's up for grabs with authors, which I think some people joke about how you better behave around an author. They may put you in a book and kill you off or something.
I do try really hard never to write, at least over. I believe writers are pieces of Velcro and we can't always help what sticks and that we funnel in, but I try very hard not to intentionally write anybody that I know into books at all, just to keep
Totally
that
understandable.
separate.
It is hard though when you're like,
Yeah.
maybe I'll just if I take a few things. So you never know. It's just a mystery. It's the mystery behind what authors do and what your mind brings out and what it doesn't. All right. So our next question is, do you tend to have a lot of story ideas going on in your mind at any given time, or do you sit down and come up with the next one after a book is finished? What's your process?
I usually have 3 ahead, and that's partly just because I always want to have options for. This is not the same for my indie world where I can just write whatever the heck I want. I always have an idea for a next three-quarter time book. Um, but for my fiction that I want to traditionally publish, I have an ideas folder, and I have never once run out of ideas. I have a million ideas and a million historical periods I want to do. It's just finessing what's going to be the most likely to get me the next contract.
What
And
you can put before your editor and they or your agent and go,
yep,
let's
what they
push
can
this
sell.
forward. Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, And I always, and I think a lot of writers are like this, I'm always the most excited about the book after the one I'm writing, because the one I'm writing is usually really tough. So I'm super excited about the next one.
That's how I am right now. I'm finishing
Yeah.
up one manuscript and I'm already like, the other one's going, just don't finish this one. Just get to me.
Yeah. It gets hard, especially
Yeah.
when
And
you're
you're
on
just
like
like,
the 17 millionth edit. So yeah, it's
I'm
hard to
sure
stay,
you're just like, I just
stay
want to be
put.
done with this one and move on. Ah, awesome. Okay. So we have one more question in this section. Are you more of a plotter or a pantser or a bit of both?
I usually know, especially with history that is very intentionally, part of Bletchley Park and the
Mhm.
war, or
A
the
timeline, historical
post-war. The
timeline.
the
Yeah.
historical timeline is where I plot, so that I
Mhm.
know ahead of time what events and sequences I want to work into the novel. But I allow myself to fall down rabbit holes. I am first and foremost a character-driven romance writer. My strength has never been plotting. It's why I have editors, to be like, this needs a plot. This scene doesn't take us anywhere. Um, so I'm a bit of both, but it usually is mostly driven ahead by what is happening with my quote unquote Pimpernel book that doesn't have a title, because the sequence and the action is actually following a lot of what happened in the fictional
Wow,
French
that's
Revolution
keeping you very
Pimpernel.
straight-laced with that, isn't
I
it?
actually don't mind it. It's like giving me an
A plumb
outline.
line. It's a plumb
Yeah.
line, like, "Okay, don't
So,
get outside of this line, Rachel."
and there's a bit of adventure in it. It's much lighter than the Mozart Code, which got a little bit dark. So I am a little bit of both, but in my own head, I just want to sit down and write. And I'm not a chronological writer. If I get an idea, I don't believe in writer's block, because many writers on deadlines who work as much as Morgan and I do, we don't have the luxury of that. So if I get stuck, I move ahead, or I am
Mhm.
like, okay, but I know this scene has to happen. I'll write it and then sew it in later.
Yeah,
So
and Christy Cameron said she does that as well. Sometimes she'll write the end, the middle, she'll skip around. It just
yeah,
depends on, like, if the inspiration strikes, you kinda need to get it on paper because 'cause I've
yeah.
done that before, and then fit it in where it goes, and you may restructure it by the time you get back to
Oh,
it,
and it
but
might get cut, but hey,
yeah,
at least I
you
did
wrote it.
something.
You wrote it, and it serves its purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. All right. Let's see. I think we're on the next section. Split time, time slip. Okay. Victoria Higham asks, why did you pick to write split time or dual time novels? Which
And I
we already talked about. Yours is a different take on it,
yeah,
but it has the parallel
it was
timelines going
all
on.
about building the foundation of the relationship of these couples. We needed enough of their backstory before the war to glean their identity during the war, and how they're making their marriages, which are quite different. One's a
Mhm.
marriage of convenience, where they're two friends who marry to save an estate, and the other is they married because they were passionately in love. And each of these two books have to all embody, and I don't express it as much vocally in the Mozart Code, each of the two books have to embody the 7 Greek forms of love. So I
Oh yeah.
had all 7 beside me, and Diana and Brent actually talk about them in this one, but
Yes, they
Sophie and
do.
Simon's love story had to have each of the 7 exemplified too. And so having that allowed me to be like, where do I need a flashback where
Hmm.
this and this happens? Because I have certain in my romances, I have certain rules for what needs to happen for me to believe a believable couple. And so flashbacks really help me establish who they were before the war and why we want them to stay together after the war. Um,
And I love that you showed us, like you said in the very beginning of the interview, about it's like where this movie stops and the credits roll, that's where you open
yeah,
up. 'Cause we want to see the messy situations with marriage, and they're coming out from war. Things are not hunky dory. They're not just like everything can go back to the way it was. Like people are changed, the cities change, your homes are changed, your perspectives are changed. And so I loved how you explored that in the London Restoration, how you explored that for Sophie and Simon and Mozart Code, and it is very different relationships. But you did a great job of just diving into the chaos with them in a relationship and showing how what the foundations of love is
well,
and can be.
insta love and just physical attraction love
Mhm.
is so uninteresting to me as a reader. If the people meet just because they see a hot person. They have to connect emotionally or with
Mhm.
a common
So there
sense
has
of
to be
intellect or
a depth
humor.
to it, a depth to
Yeah,
it, yeah.
just I mean, it's not that I don't enjoy reading the other stories, but I'm
Mhm.
far more interested. And as a writer, it's far more of a fun challenge to write an established couple. So I've been lucky to be able to do it in these books. Going forward, I might not have that luxury, but for now, it's been very fun.
Good. I'll get comments. We've had some great questions, so I'm going to we'll answer this at the end. So, but I see your questions, everyone. And Marianne Hake said, "I'd love to see your list of what makes a believable couple."
You
So
know what? I should put one on Facebook, and I'll
you
put the Greek
should.
forms of love there too, because it covers everything
Yeah.
that you would possibly have in a relationship. And it actually, I mean, I Brent is a fluent Hebrew scholar because he's a Pauline scholar. He studies St. Paul and the apostles. That's his job as a theology prof. So the Greek forms of love really worked because I was feeding in Paul's letters to the Ephesians. So that's when that first got turned on in my brain. But I thought, wow, it really is a great structure to creating any romantic couple. So stay tuned. I will get
Yes.
that up.
Check her Facebook over the next week or so. It'll be there sometime. And I wanted to this is I don't think we had a question on this, but after finishing the Mozart Code and us talking about the different forms of love and Brent and stuff and his job, and then
Yeah.
of course Diana's job with the churches and the architecture and everything. I love how you give each of the main characters their own thing that goes through it. It's a physical thing, but it goes deeper than that. It goes emotionally, mentally, even spiritually at times, with these characters. And so, can you tell us a little bit about for Sophie and Simon what their things are? Obviously, Mozart plays a big role in that.
So I knew going forward, there is a little bit of a hint of a truth in that at Bletchley Park, if you ever watched the movie The Imitation Game or read The Rose Code by Kate Quinn, it was where all the code breakers went to try and break the Enigma code, the German Enigma code, so that they could down the U-boats and win the war. And they recruited all manner of interesting men and women. And one of them was a chess master named Hugh Alexander. And when I was at Bletchley Park, I learned all about Hugh and how it was his chess mind that made him so amazing as a code breaker.
Wow.
So I thought, I'll give that to Simon. So my
Yes.
Simon sees the world through chess. I know nothing about chess, but I learned for the book. And so what I just Simon sees the world as a chessboard. Sophie sees it as her history as a classical musician. So Sophie's point of view has lots of descriptions and inner monologue of her seeing the world through music and hearing the world through music. Simon legitimately has a chessboard set up, and there are many plays that he's playing with a phantom player with notation. And the game turns out like it. We did a lot of work, my editor and I, in getting that right. But you'll notice the first sequence in Mozart Code is Simon setting up his chessboard with all the players that will factor into the story. So it's also really important for me to make sure that couples have independent lives so they do not become absorbed in each other.
Mhm.
Because I have a very kind of forward thinking independent girl. And so
Yes. Here too.
all of my couples have to have interests and passions outside of each other, so there's not that consumption. Um, so yeah, it was fun to do the chess,
I love that, and
the
that's
chess
realistic.
and
Very realistic.
Mozart's sister played chess. She was one of the
Oh,
finest chess
cool.
players in Europe and one of the
Wow.
first recorded chess players in Austria. And so I thought once I had the Mozart and chess, and they say that people who love Mozart are better chess players to begin with because
So
they
it
have
all
that.
ties in.
Oh,
It all
there's
ties in
always a
together.
million levels. I am a
I
nut for
love it.
doing all of
Yeah, and I
this.
love that, in a physical sense. I mean, like I read in the back cover copy, Sophie's looking for this Mozart death mask. So
Yeah.
that's Mozart in a physical form. Not only you're hearing the music, but his physical death mask and the mystery behind that. And then we have Simon with chess and his mind is playing things out like a chess, and he's seeing the world and situations like as if he was playing chess. And you have the physical chessboards in different scenes. So I love the different, like, it takes it beyond just the physical object. And I think a lot of times with dual time too, authors do that really well. A lot of it's between time periods where something contemporary, like the tea chest with Heidi Cheveroli, we have a tea chest in present day, and we want to know how that tea chest connects to present day from the
It she's
past.
she's very good at that. I loved that one. And the
So
Freedom Ring one too.
we love the physical objects
The
that bring us through
tangible.
time, the
Yeah.
tangible objects that take on they're almost their own character as well. Just like the
Yeah.
buildings, like the Christopher Wren churches, especially, is it Saint Bartholomew? Is that the one? The
St.
main one?
Bart's. Yeah, I just call it St.
Bart's.
Bart's in my
Yeah,
head.
Saint
They do
Bart's.
too.
So that for
Yeah.
Diana and Brent, that was like their main one. It was so
Yeah.
special to them. And so I love how that church almost became its own character, the way you portrayed it in that story. So
Yeah, I love buildings, and I feel at home in buildings that I've visited and fall in love with. So they hopefully the settings become characters for people, because they are for me when I'm
definitely.
writing them. So hopefully they like that.
Definitely. Well, we kind of meandered, but I had to ask that because that's just an interesting thing
Yes,
we've
such a
talked
good
about
question.
before about symbols. So,
Yeah.
okay, back to the regular schedule questions. And we're probably going to go over a little. Rachel said that'd be
Oh, I'm
fine. So,
around. I've got
don't
my
worry,
pineapple
guys. We're
bubbly.
going to get to the questions that we have here, and then the
Mhm.
questions in the comments. Okay. So, next question is from Shelly McGuire. What is your method for writing dual time or split time storylines?
Um, I basically always know the certain things that I need to happen, especially in the retrospectives of these characters' relationships. I need a really good meet cute or meeting. In Sophie and Simon's case, they kind of knew each other as kids because they're coming from adjacent estates in Sussex, but they meet again in adulthood at a party, and she shucks an oyster at his ear. And I just wanted them to start their relationship in a very playful way. Um, there's certain things that I need to happen in the past to bolster their present relationship. There has to be some kind of physical contact. So they have to kiss in some way or have some kind of intimate moment. They have to laugh together. That's another thing. And it really has to show who they were before the war, both with Brent and Diana and Sophie and Simon. It's setting them up so that when we meet them after the war, it's very believable who they were in the past, but we can also see how they've matured and changed. But as for the
Mhm.
method, it takes a lot of my editors for continuity, but also where to splice in those flashback sequences, because you can't just. I'm not doing a traditional
Mhm.
dual time where it's one chapter here, back
Yeah,
and
back and
forth.
forth. Yeah.
And that's
Mhm.
the traditional way that I think a lot of people approach this format.
Mhm.
But it's a lot about splicing where it's going to have the most impact due to what is happening emotionally in the lives of the characters in my
Well,
present is
and just like
1947.
with the more traditional style, you still have to be very cognizant of that, of the placement
Yeah,
of the storylines, when to reveal this, when not to reveal this, because it all plays together, transitions so well together to build on the
yeah, and
characters, their past and present.
editors really help with that because they're able to see you get so close when you are doing your 10th line edit and you've been edit. Mozart Code was in edits for over a year. It was rewritten
Wow.
that many times. So that means that I was way too close to the story, so I couldn't always see. And editors are wonderful at seeing it the way that the reader will, and imagining what it's going to be for the ideal reader.
Yay
So
for
it's
editors.
tricky. Yes, editors are how books happen.
Awesome. Well, we kind of this next question kind of goes into that too, but we've kind of answered it, so we can move on. But the question was, what's your method or methods for weaving two storylines together? We kind of talked about that. You know, it just for this, it depended. It's so because like other authors too, Heidi Cheveroli is one of them. She'll
Yeah.
skip like she'll do contemporary like 3 chapters and then 2 chapters historical. So once again, there is a traditional style we think of, but it is mixed up. But with yours, you know, it's a very intentional what do I need from the past? Why do I need the reader to see Sophie and Simon from the past interacting? How will it enhance what's happening right now in their present day? Right.
Yeah. And do pay attention to the date stamps because I'm
Hmm.
very careful at having them there so that hopefully readers aren't just like I've been flung into another time. No, there's
Right.
a reason.
It was very clear, and it was interesting to see them. You know, before the war and then now after the war, it was just, it was not nice to see, like, well, here they are now and what they're going through and what they, with all that behind them, and how that changed them. And now, we're looking back of the innocent Simon and Sophie,
Yeah,
the innocent version of them, or more innocent version, how they were interacting in that world. So yeah, the timestamps definitely helped, and you still kept it within a certain range of years to
yeah.
going back to it, so that helped as well. Do you have anything else to add to that? Or you want to move on to research
No, let's
questions?
go research. Yay,
Okay,
research.
awesome. Taylor Carlisle asked, "What was the research process like for this book?"
So I was lucky because I had done a lot of research for the time period for London Restoration. I am a huge fan of course, I've spent I've never been to a writer's craft class. Anytime I've gone to a conference, I've never actually gone to any of the workshops. All of my writing knowledge comes from reading. And so I've always read World War II era fiction. Starting with Vienna Prelude by Bodhi Tani
Oh,
when I was 10 years
yes.
old. Um, and I also am a huge fan of a show called Foyle's War. And I know it sounds silly, but Foyle's War gave me a background for the war years, what they wore, the makeup. I learned so much. So I started with that grounding for London Restoration, and then I had to become more specific. And so with this book, I knew I needed to do a lot about Mozart. I need to know more about Mozart than would ever be in the book, because I have to, like Diana being an architectural historian in this book, I have to convince people that she
Yeah.
knows a lot, and I have to be able to write in her POV. So I have to be confident enough
Mhm.
in knowing this.
You
Um,
have to be confident enough to teach a lecture on architectural
Absolutely.
Christopher Wren
Actually,
churches and things like that, right?
the most flattering thing I've ever heard was somebody who asked if I was a professor in architectural history, but it was just
Yes.
so much work. Another thing I do for research is I study archival maps, especially in cities that were heavily bombed. London was, a maze
Yeah.
of what it looks like now is not what it looked like then. Hitler forbade anyone
Mhm.
from bombing Prague, so Prague looks about the same. So that was easy. My most fun thing is that I go to these places
Yeah.
specifically for the books. So in December 2019, just before the world exploded, I spent 3 weeks in Vienna and Prague. And all I did was research the architecture specific. I went to the museum that was all about the Kulturkrieg and all about the Cold War. I knew I needed to do chess research, Cold War research, Mozart research, and then, of course, the political climate of the rising communist world. So it was a lot of reading. Luckily, Toronto has an amazing library system, so I can get anything I need back here, but it was a lot of on site research. And it's the
So
same
glad
for
that you
now.
slipped that trip in. So glad you slipped that
I
trip in.
know, and it's
Barely, barely.
sad.
It
I've
is
had to
sad.
postpone my Rouen and Paris. I've been to both of these places before, but not specifically for research. I had to postpone twice, so I'm hoping during the editorial process I can go over and then just
I
weave
hope
in some
so,
descriptives.
yes.
Yeah, knock on wood. But I know I'm lucky to go. Not every author has that ability. There is uh, and I should just throw in that I put it to good use. I've written a nonfiction book called Dream Plan and Go, all about solo
Yes.
travel all over
And
the
it's
world.
fabulous. I've read it, of course,
Um,
and listened to her
well, I
narrate the
recorded the audio.
audiobook.
I had to audition for that. People don't realize, but authors have to audition to read their own
Oh
audiobooks.
my gosh, that's really funny, but I loved it. I was like, "Rachel's talking to me about her book. She's literally reading her book to me. This is awesome." I feel like it was a
I was thinking
fireside
that.
chat or something. And there's a journal with it too. I'll throw
Yeah,
that out there
it was
too.
cute. And Mozart, just I read so many letters that Mozart sent to his father, because a lot of Simon's identity is his not understanding how he fits in because he's
Mhm.
illegitimate and he wonders who his true father is. And Mozart's relationship with his father, Leopold, was very interesting. So, yeah, I just nerd out for a long time. And then books happen. And I always ensure that my historical notes are at the front of the book so that the readers go
Okay,
in,
yeah.
they're always at the front. The readers go in knowing why I took what historical liberties. So some old guy with like the tweed jacket with the patches will be like, "Ugh,
The real
crazy girl."
professor is gonna be like, "No."
No. I
Oh
explain
gosh.
why I did this,
Well, and
everybody.
then it goes back to, like, it's fiction,
It
so,
is. I can't have
we
a
have to
PhD in
take some
everything.
liberties, though, like you said, working along a historical timeline, is it helps a lot, and you try to keep as close to that, but we are writing fictional situations that are based on truth, our true
Yeah,
stories sometimes, so we have those liberties, but I love reading the historical notes,
me
author
too.
notes, and kind of seeing like, okay, yeah, oh, she wove that in there, he wove this in, really well, and it's true, like to the letter almost, or this is a cool deviation, but it still fits. It's just interesting to read the back matter or the front matter in your
So
case
it's
of the book.
supposed to be a bridge so that you're interested in reading more about these things by
Mhm.
actual professionals. That's what I think all of we historical novelists do. Hopefully entice some interest so that you go and read more
Yeah,
about
and that's why a lot
something.
of times in the back of the book, you'll see lists, like research lists. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure Catherine Ray had a long list of her
Oh yeah,
sources
she did so
that
much.
you can go and actually read the accounts yourself or watch a program or lecture series. So I always think that's interesting to be able to see the sources that authors use when that's included.
Yeah.
So interesting. All right. So our next question about research is from Carol Lear Johnson. She asks, "What is your method for organizing your research?" Because I know reading and seeing it. How do you keep all that together to use for towards your books?
I actually use the Notes app that's in the iCloud. I'm a Mac and iPhone and iPad user, and that means that whenever I find something, I've got several little tabs that are divided by like music, chess, this area of the war this year, anything that I find, any links I find online, I can put in there. And if I'm away from home at the library or out researching, then it's automatically in
You
all
have it
forms. It's
at your
in the cloud.
fingertips.
Yeah, so I do that. But I'm also very meticulous at writing down where I found a specific fact, down to the page number in a book, but also because I use our reference library a lot, down to the call number in the library so that I know if I need to go back to something, I can find
And
it.
once your editors ask you about things and you have to show them sometimes, like this is where I got this exact
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, and I have had, especially line edits and copy
Mhm.
editors, their job is to eagle eye their way through. And obviously stuff gets through the cracks and we can't help it.
Oh yeah,
It happens in every book,
we're,
but
we're no one's perfect. Surprise.
yeah, but what ticks me off is when a reader is like, Diana and Brent were eating too many eggs. They were on rations, and I described the powdered eggs that they were eating. Brent eats cardboard at one point because Diana's a horrible cook. Like, that's the
Yes.
stuff. Like, I'm sorry, guys. I'm not gonna miss that. Like, there is there's a reason for that, but you
And we're
try your
not we're
best.
not gonna have them not be able to walk because they couldn't eat enough to have
No,
nutrients. Like,
and
you've got to, give a little with that for sure.
yeah, but it's fun.
Like your character's coughing all the time because they breathe in all this dust that's still in the air from the blitz.
Yeah.
Like we don't want to see on the page a reader just, I mean, a character just coughing all the time because of the dust. So, we add in the sensory details, but there's too much sensory overload if we just did all of it.
Yeah, it's
All right.
hard.
It is hard. It's hard to get the balance, and you just do your best, and your editors help, and that's it. And you're always going to have the critics come
Yeah.
after a book. It just happens. Okay, our next question is, how long does it take you to research a book? You can talk about Mozart Code specifically, or usually. I know it was Mozart Code was a little different because it was a longer
Yeah,
process.
that was my hardest book to date because of
Hmm.
the pandemic. It was really hard to write, but I would say that it differs from book to book. And say with Harringford and Watts, I wrote 6 stories set in Edwardian Toronto with sojourns to Massachusetts and Chicago. A lot of it is the upfront for that first book to get into the period, and then it turns into book specific things. So I would say that I like to do 4 to 6 months, but again, deadlines and release dates are getting smushed closer and closer together. So with Pimpernel, I don't have the luxury of 4 to 6 months. What I do have is the ability to be like, I've got an idea. I'm going to go spend. I did this yesterday. I went and spent 3 hours at the library and just was like, okay, I'm plotting out
Hmm.
this. So the internet helps. Uh, my friends help. But again, this is my third World War II era book
Mhm.
in 3 years, so I've got a lot of the
You're
lingo
in
down.
that
Yeah,
world. You're in that world enough, you just need to more specifics for the
yeah,
location, right? Yeah, very good. Alright, next question. Have you well, we already kinda answered this, but if
yeah.
you wanna
Lots and lots.
expound on it, have you visited the locations of the book or your books, and were you there for research or leisure or both? And you've already answered that, so do you wanna
Yeah.
talk about one specific instance that you were surprised about that may have inspired a scene in the book or something? It's whatever direction you wanna take the question.
I mean, it's just kind of cool that I was in London for fun. And I studied in England in university for a year. I studied at the University of Sussex, so I took a lot of side trips,
Oh,
and I had
awesome.
been back. Um, but it was, I wasn't writing. I had just turned in one of my Hamish DeLuca books. I wasn't on deadline, and I was wandering London for fun after seeing a show at the Fringe. My friend had a play on at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival,
Oh,
so I was like,
wow,
I'll
cool.
just go do some stuff in London. And I walked into St. Bartholomew the Great, and that's when Brent spoke to me, and I knew I had to write those churches. So I went back specifically to London for 10 days just to visit probably about 55 churches and to spend some
Wow.
time at Bletchley Park. And I lived in those churches. I did. And then again with Mozart Code, it was Vienna and Prague, both cities I had been to before for fun, but it was specific for the
Mhm.
research for the book, but also for taking my camera out and taking pictures and writing. I use my pen as my camera often, so I write what I see and then I can funnel it into the book later. But I know I'm very fortunate to be able to do
I
this.
love it, and you really do, like, London restoration for sure, like, you feel like you have a architectural Christopher Wren church
I
knowledge,
loved
like, you've
that.
been through the fiction course of it. You really
Yeah,
do, and
I
it's
love
just
that.
and it makes like, I was thinking about churches, and I was like, "Wow, I would have never noticed that," and, like, Diana's noticing all these things, and you're in the character's deep POV in their head, and you're like, "Oh my gosh," so, yeah, you dove right in there with that, and
It's
we
so
do feel like we got an education.
cool. And what struck me was the same amount of churches that were destroyed in the Great Fire of London in 1666 were the same amount of churches that were bombed in the Blitz.
Oh,
So
wow, I
Wren
didn't know
was
that.
hired, man, I'm a nerd, but Wren was hired to design the churches that were destroyed by the fire. And then Diana represented all the people who were hired to the first thing Londoners rebuilt after the war. They started with the churches. I thought that was amazing. The
That is.
Viennese started with the opera houses, so that's kind of
It
cool
makes
too.
sense,
It
it makes
shows where the
sense.
priorities are.
Well, and it shows too, like, the symbols of the cities,
Yeah.
like, the buildings and the art and the skylines, and the skyline was so drastically changed in London, like we
Yeah.
said, to see those churches rise back up, it made people think, "Well, we can rise up again, things
Oh,
can
it's
be
such
okay,"
a
it's the
good
symbolism.
morale boost. Yeah, I
Yes,
love it.
definitely. I love that too. Alright, well, we're at toward the end of our questions, and we'll answer the
These were
questions in our
such good questions.
comment.
Yay.
Yay! And this is so great. So we're just over an hour now, but we're getting close. Um, Gail, Helgeson said, "Have you been to England, and where's your favorite spot?" We know you've been to
Yep.
England. So where would you say in England is your favorite spots or favorite places you've
Well,
been
I
there?
clearly love London. I love
Yes.
Haworth because I'm a huge fan of the Brontes, so I love Yorkshire, that area. I'm in the Yorkshire Dales. They're so beautiful and all creatures great and small. They're captured that in that PBS series. I love the Age of Sail and nautical history, so I love Portsmouth
Oh,
a
yeah, you
lot.
love
I love
Master and
ships. I
Commander.
love Master Commander. So the tall ships in Portsmouth, but I mean I love so much. I love Oxford a lot. I love Oxford University. I think it's beautiful. But I really do want to do one of those author travels sometime where I do the
Ooh,
churches of
yes.
England because I
Oh,
think
that
some
would
people
be
would find
so
that fun.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely plan that, let us know, and then we will go with Diana in your head to go see the
Yeah.
churches, and
To
you can point out
ramble
the
about
things
all the
that
churches.
Diana would talk about, and then this is the spot where Brent came into your mind, like, we can see where it all went
Yeah.
down. Love it. Okay, let's see, we got one more question on the list. What was the most interesting information you found out while researching your book? We've talked about a few things, of course, but if you think of anything else specific you haven't shared that you would like to share.
I really liked I it was years and years ago that I found out that Mozart's death mask. Mozart was buried in a pauper's grave in Vienna. He died impoverished under sketchy circumstances. He was
Oh.
only 38. And he's
Oh
this
gosh,
classical
I didn't know
genius.
he was that young.
And he
Stay
died
young.
like no one knows where his grave is. And so
Wow.
in I remember reading that his death mask showed up in a Viennese pawn shop in 1947. And I was like, that is an amazing thing. I'm going to file this away in my little brain attic. And it waited there
Nerd.
for
Hey,
years.
being a nerd pays off.
And it's only every Viennese scholar I talk to has a differing opinion. Some say it's authentic, some think it's not. But
Mhm.
just the idea that after the war, and I talk about this in the London Restoration, one of the cool things about the bombings was it unearthed all these Roman artifacts and all of these amazing, the Blitz bombs unearthed things from thousands of years ago when London was a Roman city. And in the same way, there's the restitution aspect of the Second World War, where Hitler would pillage, especially from Jewish
Mm.
families, works of art and music that were scattered all over Europe. And suddenly they somehow find their way back home. So, any of that research where things that were long lost, these priceless materials, were somehow found and brought back to their rightful place, is it's a big theme in the Mozart Code, and why Sophie wants to return, why Prague and Vienna both claim Mozart. But that mask thing was always super cool to me.
Oh
So,
yeah, and it played many different roles in the book. We won't be no spoilers. We haven't given any spoilers. We're not going to do it now, but yeah. So it was interesting. I'd never heard of Mozart's death mask, and I didn't know much about Mozart. So once again, I'm learning. I love to learn as I read fiction. It's for
me too.
entertainment
That's how I
and
learned.
to inform. So love it. All right, I'm going to find our questions
Yeah.
we have in our comments. We do have a few. Okay, Marianne Hake said, "How do you decide how and where to place the dual timelines within your book? How did you choose that?"
So a lot of it was just, as I think I said before, it was a lot about what's feeding the relationship. What do I need to happen so that these characters have a convincible connection?
Mhm,
When I was working with, with Diana and Brent with their Bletchley, Brent had to have injuries and he
mhm,
suffers from PTSD when he's back from the front. So I had to have sequences. And then
mhm,
when it comes time to choose where they go, my editors helped a lot. I kind of knew this is where an emotional break needs to happen.
mhm,
We need to show things that are a little bit lighter, or why this character is making this choice in the present time. But it was also a lot about the readability for the reader and how it was best going to be expressed. So it's a little bit of everything, but it was me knowing we need to see these people before the war to understand who they are now.
and the decisions they're making too. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that you the positioning was really was great because you're just like and like you do with like you said, this book is a little bit darker and heavier than London Restoration, which did have its
Mm-hmm.
own dark and heavy moments, but you need those moments of breathing for the reader to have like, okay, now you take a little breath. Now we're back in the intensity. Now we have a
Yeah.
little breath. But it was for a reason. It wasn't just for a break. It was everything your editor said, this has to move the story
Oh,
forward.
and
So
it needed to be
everything had to move it forward.
it needed to be lighter. Part of the reason it took so long in edits is because during the pandemic and isolation, the
Mm,
world's being so sad, it kept showing up in that book. It got to be really depressing,
the
and so I
theme,
needed
the
to
theme.
lighten it a little bit. Yeah,
Well, and I guess in a way it was like thinking about before the pandemic too. Like you had to think
yeah,
about what life was like before the
that
pandemic and how things
nostalgia.
were.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that was who your characters were. They're different now, but they have to look back at how they were and grab hold of those
yeah,
people. So yeah, it worked. It definitely worked, but it's of course, sad it had to be able to write a book like
yes.
that, and it's understandable for it to have themes like that, but yeah, I know the balance was ended up really good, so go you and go the editor.
Yay! I finished it. Yay!
Yes! Okay,
It's
I think I
over.
see another question. Oh, Perry Ann Askew asked, "Since you've been published both indie and traditional, which is your preferred method to publish?"
I will say that traditional is my preferred, because I love having the editorial and marketing team. I love going into bookstores and seeing my book there. That doesn't, I mean, if you want to put an indie book in a bookstore, a physical bookstore, you often have to pay a shelf surcharge, and I'm not into that. What I do like about indie publishing is you can publish whatever you want, when you want, without committee or sales decisions behind it. So no publisher would ever publish those Viennese romances I write, the 3/4 time series. They are not palatable enough for a publishing committee to take on. But I get to do them for fun for me. So you get control of the cover when you indie publish, you get control of who you hire as an editor, and you get control of the timeline. But traditional, I really love being with a team, and I love being with HarperCollins because they have, I have a different publicist in Canada who works for the Toronto office. So I end up having publicists in the UK with HarperCollins London, and in America in Nashville where they are, and here. So I mean, that's kind of neat,
That's
the whole
awesome.
international support.
The
Yes.
Rachel support team for your
Yeah.
books.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Great question. Let's see. Oh, Michelle Phoenix is here too. Hi, Michelle.
Oh,
She said,
she's fantastic. Yeah.
yes,
Love
not a
her.
question, just a statement. Rachel is the best and most enthusiastic supporter of other writers. What a kick in the
Oh.
pants she is to us. So,
Well, I love you, Michelle Phoenix, amazing split time author in her own right, who
yes,
wrote that gorgeous Fragments of Light last year, which was
yes,
just, was it last year or the
we
year
had,
before?
yeah, we had a chat about it. She came on our I interviewed her and we got to chat about that book and I loved it.
So good. Yeah, she's a great writer.
Well, and I think too,
Oh,
I think what great thing about industry, especially the Christian industry, but also, that we can support each other. It's not just competition. We're not seeing each other as competition. We can actually, talk about books you love. You don't want to just talk about your books. You want to talk about
no,
everyone's
it's boring
books.
to talk about your own books all the time. And I have to give I mean, I would say at this point, most of my writer connections and most of my readers are in the general market. That's just the way
Mhm.
it's turned out. And it's equally as supportive on the other
That's
side. I
great.
mean, the fact that everybody knew how tough it was for me to write this book. So we have like 10 pages of endorsements from authors who wrote my editor and said, "Can I endorse Mozart Code just to help
Oh,
Rachel
that's
out a bit?"
awesome. That's awesome.
Like it's just everyone took their time. So yay to writers
It
and to
takes the
readers.
village.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a
Yeah.
village. It's other writers helping other writers and readers helping authors and authors helping readers and like
Yeah.
doing things like this, like we talked about. All Rachel's the Zoom queen. If you want to hear her talk more about her
I
books,
have
please,
so many
she has a
interviews
list of
coming up. Yeah,
Zooms.
I
Okay, have
always
you
have
done the New
interviews.
York Public Library in New York
Nope,
City
that one's
yet?
coming out in June. But I've got,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm doing
that's
many,
awesome.
many for Mozart Code. I'm doing bookstores and libraries, but on my Facebook page, I also interview authors. I took a month off for my own promotion, but I've got some cool people coming up. So
Yeah,
hopefully
so if
people
you
can
like
chat.
more chats that are more often than we do ours, check out Rachel's
Yeah, stalk
Facebook
me.
page, and yeah, stalk her. She'll if you start stalking her enough, she'll pop up in your feed, and you'll know everything. That's kind of where I am. I'm like, oh yeah, what's Rachel done today? Oh, I see her post. And so yeah, so she'll announce like, okay, well, this week I've got this coming up. So
Yeah.
you never, and then you may just see it pop up on your phone that she's live. Oh, what's she talking about? Let's
Oh,
click
I'm
over
there.
there.
Yeah.
So she's gonna be there. Let's see if we have any more questions. Let's see. Great comments. Oh, we have the question. Okay, last question. Marianne Hake asks, so do you write the threads separately and then put them together, or are you writing? I know you said you write kind of scenes differently.
Yeah.
But do you write more chronologically overall, or what do you
No.
think?
I
All
just get an
mixed up.
idea for the scene, and is it like a present Sophie and Simon scene, or is it a past one? And then I write it. So, wow, I'm not organized. There's method to my madness. Every book I say this is going to be
Obviously.
different, but it isn't ever. But it's all very much based on, and I'm weird because most of my writing happens when I walk, and I am a huge walker. When I go to different cities, I'm walking for hours. Toronto is a massive it's bigger than Chicago. So to just give you a size of Toronto, it's
Wow.
it's a huge. It's the third largest city in North America, and it's a fantastic walking city with ravines and
No
a
wonder
castle.
you have a
Um,
castle then.
and
Wow.
so I'll walk. I will often walk 2 to 3 hours a day, and it gets all in my head. It plays out cinematically,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I have to transpose that movie into words. But I work out what scene needs to happen where. So
So I
it's a
guess
challenge, but
would you say you're more well, we know you're character driven writer.
yeah,
We've talked about that.
always
So
character driven.
also an emotional, do you feel like the emotion
Oh
carries
yeah,
a very
yeah.
emotional writer? There's the scene that's evoking the most emotion at the time is one you might write then.
Absolutely, because I find them a little bit easy. I mean, with some of Simon's stuff, because he's so insecure, he comes
Mhm.
off as this Savile Row wearing, very confident person, but he suffers from debilitating insecurity. And so that was a little hard to dig deep in. But yeah, emotionally driven and setting driven. I love to paint beautiful cities in books with my words, hopefully.
Well, and we want you to keep doing that because we're enjoying it, and those of you who haven't got to read the books, I know they're gonna read them now, especially after hearing all this wonderful
Hey,
answers from you for these questions.
look at the covers.
Yes,
I mean,
and they're
I can
gorgeous.
brag about them because I had nothing to do with them. I just got to see the concepts and I was like, "Oh my
They're
gosh."
gorgeous.
Yeah, they're very
Well,
beautiful.
like, I want a set of pearls now because of Sophie,
I
like, I just
know.
that's
It's
her
so great.
thing, and you'll if you read the book, you'll know, when they play with it on the cover, you can see them, But, yeah, I was like, the pearls, and the red lipstick," which you're lovely
I
wearing
know.
today.
I just always wear red lipstick, and so people are like, "Is that why
It's
they have red
fabulous.
lipstick?" I'm like, "It's partly a period thing."
Well, it was a
Um,
fashion, but Rachel's just classic style, so
love my red lipstick.
awesome. Well,
These
thanks so
are
much for being our
such good
guest
questions.
today. We've really enjoyed it. And like I said, if you're just tuning in after the fact, please leave comments and questions and we can get back to you. I'm sure Rachel would be glad to answer any questions if you have
Absolutely.
them. I can let her know if there's other questions. But thank you so much. And guys, please check out the Mozart Code and the London Restoration. And we'll excitedly wait the Scarlet Pimpernel's book, not
Yes, next
titled.
September and then next March. I've got books both of the time, but also follow me if you ever have any questions about the industry because I
Yeah,
try to be as
where should
transparent as
we
possible.
follow you? Facebook,
Um,
you're under Rachel McMillan, right?
yep, I'm Rach K. Mick in all of my handles. Instagram is where I talk most about books. I'm most active on Twitter. I know not everybody loves Twitter, but that's where all the publishing news happens. So it's kind of a huge part of my job as a literary agent. But I'm always Rach K. Mick everywhere, and I'm not that hard to find. So
Yeah.
stalk away.
Goodreads, Instagram, Twitter,
Yeah,
Facebook, you'll find her
you can
in
find
the
me.
lives. Yay! Well,
Thanks so much, guys.
thanks again. We're so glad to have you today. And guys, if you haven't left a answer, question, or comment, please do. We'll enter you in the giveaway for Mozart Code. But
Woohoo.
we'll hopefully see you in our group really
Oh,
soon.
yeah. I'm in the group now. I can comment. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks,
Bye, Rachel.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, guys, that was so awesome to interview Rachel. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Please check out the Mozart Code and London Restoration if you haven't already. I am looking forward to the next installment, which she will bring us in 2023, I think she said. So I'll be waiting for that, and I know in our group she'll let us know when we have more information and a cover reveal and a title. So, guys, I hope you have a great Saturday, and I will talk to you later. Bye.